In 2015, New York Red Bulls defender Matt Miazga was set to move to Chelsea to make it big in the Prem, and Kwadwo Poku was scoring bangers for New York City FC. In 2021, Brian Reynolds has just moved to AS Roma on loan with an 8-figure purchase fee. Things have changed a lot for MLS over the years. So every year MLS releases a list of the top prospects in Major League Soccer, called the MLS 22 under 22. It's the top 22 prospects under the age of 22. Now, a few years ago it was rebranded to this name from the previous name, or renamed to this name from the previous name, called MLS 24 under 24, where it was the top 24 youngsters under the age of 24. Now, what we're going to be doing in this video is that we're going to do kind of a statistical analysis comparing the 2015 MLS 24 under 24 to the 2020 MLS 22 under 22. So two different lists. And why do I want to do this? Well, I think that these lists are very representative of the type of youngsters that were in Major League Soccer in both years, in 2015 and 2020. So I think we can draw a lot of conclusions by looking at various different statistics that we'll see later on in this video. And we can see how Major League Soccer has changed overall, particularly with developing youth talent. So let's get into it. So I quickly coded Windows and Google in 10 or 20 minutes, the simple programs to code. Then I created a spreadsheet to analyze various pieces of information from both the 2015 and 2020 list to compare and contrast. Now that one took a little bit longer than coding Google. One of the first things I wanted to look at while creating this spreadsheet was who is producing the most top talent. Some of the results might shock you a little bit. In 2015, New England had the most players in MLS 24, under 24, having 4 players out of the 24 players. This included the likes of Juan Agudelo, Andrew Farrell, Diego Fagundes, and Kellen Rowe. 25% of teams didn't even have one player on the list. On the other hand, in 2020, FC Dallas unsurprisingly had the most players on MLS 22 under 22, having 4 players on the list. This includes Paxton Pomykal, Jesus Ferreira, Brian Reynolds, and Tanner Tessman. Keep in mind that 54% of the players this time around didn't even have one player on the list, meaning that players in this ranking are progressively being concentrated to a smaller group of teams that value youth production more than others. I guess in 2020 there needs to be more of a stringent focus on youth talent in order to have a good chance of getting a player on this list, as opposed to 2015. However, there are 6 more teams in 2020 and 2 less players, so that is also a major aspect for the fact that there is a higher percentage of teams that don't have a single player on this list. I also wanted to quick note that compared to 2015, now in 2021, contracts are starting to get a bit different for youngsters. Back then, they wouldn't be making too much money. Some of the foreign young talent would make more money. But now we're seeing, this is a bit of an outlier, but I think it will become more of a trend past 2021, is that Jesus Ferreira signed a targeted allocation money contract, or a TAM contract, in late 2019 after he had an impressive season with FC Dallas. He's a forward for them. And what that means, I believe, is that he's making over $600,000 a year, over the maximum salary budget charge in Major League Soccer. That would be unheard of back in 2015 with regards to academy talent. So that is a pretty amazing revelation that we've had over the past few years. I wouldn't say it's a trend quite yet, but I think it will get bigger over time. And I guess FC Dallas is trying to hold on to their top academy talent, at least a few of the players. So I think it's something that would be good for the long-term development of MLS. So now let's talk about the player nationalities on the MLS 22 under 22. These statistics might fly in the face of some of the narratives that you might believe about MLS, and one thing that I kind of believed when I was creating these initial statistics. But in 2015, 13 players were born in the US or Canada, while there were 18 in 2020. In 2015, there were 11 foreign players on this list, while there are only 4 in 2020. Since the total players on each list are unequal, 24 players in 2015, 22 in 2020, I'm going to look at this in percentages as well, just to give you a better analysis of these statistics. 54% of the players on the MLS 24 under 24 back in 2015 were from the US or Canada, while 46% were foreign born. On the other hand, 82% of players on this list in 2020 were born in the US or Canada, while only 18% were foreign born. So even more players are coming from the US or Canada of the top prospects in MLS. That means that there has been a significant switch in MLS towards getting its top young stars from foreign leagues to now developing more players
here at home.
I know many of you may be thinking, well, what about the Ezequiel Barcos and the Jesus Medinas of MLS? Like, what about those players? Aren't they dominating the list? Well, I don't think Jesus Medina was on the MLS 22 under 22, but I do know for a fact Ezequiel Barco was included on it. Now, I think while we're bringing in more South American players, MLS teams are, like higher quality Argentinian players and that kind of stuff, I think at a faster rate they're developing academy players. You see it with Philadelphia Union, they're producing more than just one quality academy player, every 3 seasons. They're producing a few players sometimes a year, and you can't sign Argentinian players unless you want to spend a lot of money. You can't sign multiple high-quality Argentinian or Paraguayan youngsters a year. So I think the academy prospects, while we're getting a lot of South American quality young players, the academy prospects are dominating this list because they're just being developed at a faster rate. And I also think that the academy prospects, compared to 2015, are much higher in quality. They were high quality then, or they were pretty good quality. They're a lot higher quality now. Like a good comparison of the quality of domestic players coming out of MLS is, let's compare these two Canadians, Kyle Larin and Alphonso Davies. Kyle Larin is a high quality player, but nowhere close to as good as Alphonso Davies. And while I don't think Alphonso Davies is currently going to be a norm of producing that kind of player every single season, I think the chances of producing a player of his quality is much higher than back in 2015. So I do think the domestic players are improving in quality, and that's why we have more of them on the list than compared to 2015. Now on to player ages. Let's keep in mind the fact that the player age restriction was lowered from 24 under 24 to 22 under 22, so this will skew the number quite a bit. In 2015, the average age on the 24 under 24 was 21.75 years old, and in 2020, the 22 under 22 averaged 19.41 years old. So the average age decreased by 2.34 years in just 5 years. Let's keep in mind the fact that the players in 2020, while younger, are actually often higher quality than many of the players on the list in 2015, who were older and more experienced. Now looking at the youngest players on the list, in 2015 it was Eric Palmer Brown, who was 18 years old. In 2020 it was 16-year-old Moses Nyman, who plays for DC United. Something also of note is that the majority of players in 2015 who were on the list were either 23, 22, or 20 years old, while in 2020 it was mainly 20 and 19-year-olds. However, MLS is getting younger and higher quality with its top youth, in my opinion. It is truly becoming the selling league that MLS Commissioner Don Garber was hoping it would become just a few years ago. Signing young players in 2015 and in 2021 has also been a big change in terms of what is defined as young. Back, I remember in 2015, I found a player was young when they were like 23 years old. Nowadays, it's like 19 or 20 years old. There's a lot of players getting signed at 15 years old. I mean, look at Alphonso Davies. He made his debut for Vancouver Whitecaps at the age of 15. Now, I know there's outliers like Freddie Adu. I believe he signed for DC United back in 2004 at the age of 14, which is crazy. I think that's a little too young to sign a player. I mean, the guy's probably in like grade 9 or something like that when he signed. But the players are getting younger in MLS, and they are getting higher quality talent at younger ages. So that is an interesting thing that's also changed over the years with Major League Soccer over the past, 5 or 6 years. So that has changed quite a bit. Now lastly, where are these youngsters coming from? Specifically, how did they initially go pro? In 2015, the Super Draft had already begun to become less relevant, with only 25% of the players on the list coming from the Super Draft. 1/3 of the players came from MLS academies, and the largest group came from other sources at 42%. Now, what are other sources? Well, I define them as any player who didn't come from the Super Draft, who didn't go pro from the Super Draft, or an MLS academy. So they could come from, Manchester United Academy, they could go pro from that, or they could go pro from signing for an NASL team, which I think Kwadwo Poku did. So those kind of players. In 2020, the number of players who came from the Super Draft went down to 9%. The MLS Academy graduates went up to 68% of the players on this list, from just 1/3 5 years before. And the players from other sources went down to only 23%, a drastic change for the landscape of Major League Soccer, specifically regarding its young players. So what do these numbers mean? That the Super Draft is becoming far less relevant with developing the top prospects in MLS than it was back in the day. This trend has been happening for some time, as there were more players on the MLS 24 under 24 in 2015 who went pro through the MLS Academy system as opposed to the Super Draft system, even back then. While I still think the Super Draft holds a relevant pillar in MLS to this day, it has become relegated to just another draft where teams can source players from, as opposed to a draft where you can consistently pull out star young talent like you may have been able to do back in the 1990s. Something also of note is that compared to 2015, a lot more players signed with the USL affiliates of Major League Soccer teams. And this results in a lot less of them getting on MLS 22 under 22, because let's consider this fact, that a lot of them are like 21 years old. And if they sign for a USL team, and even if they're successful, they might sign for the top team 2 years later after 2 good seasons, and it'll be 23, so they can't be on the list because they're too old for the list. They have to be under 22. That results in a lot less Super Draft picks being on the MLS 22 under 22 than compared to the MLS 24 under 24 back in 2015, back when the age limit was up 2 extra years, and also the academy players were more often signed for the first team. Now it's starting to become, the MLS Super Draft is starting to become more of a draft where the top 10 players might get signed to the first team mostly, and then everyone else is signed to the USL team or just not signed at all. So that does have a big effect. And the MLS draft is starting to become more of a draft for the late bloomer players, I would call them. Aaron Long is a good example of this, but he was originally drafted back in like 2014, where he was signed to an MLS team, I think Portland Timbers, and then he played for the second team, was released. Then he signed for Seattle, played for the second team there, was released, and then he signed for New York Red Bulls too, and then was promoted. And by that time he was like 25 years old and started playing his first team football, played his first appearance in Major League Soccer with New York Red Bulls around like 24 or 25 years old, which is pretty late on. So although most players are not signed to 3 different MLS teams before they make their first appearance, a lot of Super Draft picks, they have to spend a few years playing in the lower divisions before they're able to make it up to the top league in Major League Soccer. So that's been a big difference between a lot of academy players who make it in early and then they'll sign at 19 for Toronto FC, and they'll be making it big from a younger age. So that's an interesting thing that's changed over MLS, as opposed to back in the day you'd be getting the top prospects for Major League Soccer mainly from the draft. In my opinion, Major League Soccer is one of the most interesting leagues to watch in the world because of how it changes so much and improves on a year-to-year basis. And one of the biggest changes, again, is youth production. It produces higher quality youth every single year, just about every single year, and it's getting better and better at developing them because it constantly improves every single season. Anyway, that's about it for this video. If you did like this video, please drop a like, and if you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe. Thank you for watching, and until next time, see you.